If you have ever tried to hand sew with machine thread, then you know how frustrating that can be. Machine thread is thin, it's slippery, and it's sharp. It constantly slips out of your needle and it continually tangles. And then your seams look bad when you're done. That is because machine thread is made for sewing on a machine. So if you have a desire to improve your hand sewing, then stop using machine thread and use a thread that is made for hand sewing. But what does that mean? What is the best thread for hand sew? Well, you want something that is a little thicker, toothier, and also a bit softer as well. So the first time I used a proper hand sewing thread, my mind was absolutely blown. It was like night and day. I mean, it absolutely changed my hand sewing experience. And ever since then, I'm much pickier about what I will use to hand sew my garments. Welcome, friend. I'm Lalena with Thimble and Plume, and we are historical reenactors with a passion for sharing the things that we have learned over the years in order to empower you to become the best costumer you can be. So let's talk about what you need to know in order to pick out the best thread for construction and finishing work in historical garments. Now, unless you're incredibly lucky, the best threads for sewing 16th century clothing are not available locally. You do have to order them online. But I do have some options for alternatives that, although they are not historically accurate, they are available at your local sewing center. Either way, knowing how threads are labeled makes it easier for you to choose which thread is best for your sewing project. Basically, threads are categorized by fiber and size, which brings us to tip 1. Choose the proper thread fiber. So the general wisdom is to match your thread fiber to your garment fiber. And that's because they will respond the same to external circumstances. Now, this works great for linen and silk, but wool is a different case. So we'll start there. So I personally have not had much luck finding modern wool that is strong enough for construction and finishing of garments. Unfortunately, most of today's wool threads are formulated for wool darning and decorative stitching. You can see here how easily these wool threads pull apart. Now imagine if you constructed your entire dress out of it. So Mullen has a story where she hand sewed her wool dress with wool thread. Unfortunately, her seams kept popping, so she had to re-sew the entire dress with different thread. So the takeaway is to just stay away from wool thread for construction and save it for decorative stitching. Instead, I would suggest using a linen for seams and either a finer linen or silk for finishing. The reason why you wouldn't want to use silk for construction seams is because the silk is stronger than the wool, so it may cause the fabric to rip if there's any sort of tension put on it. So that brings us to linen thread. Linen thread is not only used for clothing, but it is also used for bookbinding, sail making, and leather sewing as well. So make sure you are choosing a thread that is for garment sewing. A good linen thread is a dream to sew with. It is strong and toothy enough to avoid slipping out of the needle, and it is documentable as a thread through most of history. Use it to construct and finish linen garments as well as construction seams in wool. So my favorite thread is this Spockens thread that is a needle lace thread that is made in Sweden. It's strong, it comes in various sizes and colors, and you get a lot of thread on the spool. This is about a dress and a half in here. And I've also heard good things about the linen thread from Burnley and Trowbridge, but I haven't personally tried it yet. Silk thread is strong and comes in a variety of sizes and colors. It's great for all sorts of sewing applications, including construction, finishing, and decorative stitching. And it beats steel in tensile strength, making it the strongest natural fiber in existence. But it is also more susceptible to heat, acidity, and time, which is why it is best used in construction seams in silk only. Look for filament or monofilament thread from Japan. Now, if you decide to make hand-bound buttonholes, make sure to get silk buttonhole twist, which can also be used for eyelets, decorative sewing, and top stitching. Now, while these threads are historically accurate, they can be a little pricey, and you have to order them online. So if you aren't quite ready to invest in them yet, you're short on time, or you're on a budget, here are some modern alternatives that you can find at your local Joann's that will work well for hand sewing. Hand quilting thread is a polyester thread, but it is thicker and toothier than machine thread. Bold hand quilting thread is a bit heavier and would be a nice general sewing thread. Here's a heavy-duty top stitching thread, a home deck heavyweight thread. These I have also had good luck with. But make sure you stay away from any of the all-purpose thread, anything from the craft and button section, as well as anything that has a glaze on it. So once you've decided on the appropriate fiber, the next thing to consider is size. Tip 2, choose a proper thread size. And if you are finding value in this video, make sure to give it a like. You want to choose a thread size that complements the weight of your garment fabric. So a lighter, finer fabric will want a lighter, finer thread, and vice versa. So thread size is generally determined by the weight, as well as the number of fibers twisted together to form the thread. Now, thread weight is actually very complicated because there's many different methods of measure, and I won't go into it here, but it actually is kind of an interesting history. But for the most part, the weight is actually a ratio of the length to weight. For the threads I cover today and recommend, the smaller the number, the thicker the thread. A good way to remember this is that that number corresponds to how many kilometers of thread it takes to weigh a kilogram. So, since a thicker thread is heavier, it takes less length of it to make that weight. So linen thread is typically labeled with two numbers. The first is the weight and the second is the ply. And this refers to the amount of plies that have been twisted together to form the thread. The weight ranges from as heavy as 16 to as fine as 140. And typically you see it with 2 to 3 plies. I tend to use 35/2 for general purpose sewing, which means that it's made from 2 lengths of fiber with a weight of 35. Now, if I'm working with a finer fabric, I'll jump up to 80/2 or even 100/2. Silk thread is also identified by a number. Now, if you see WT in front of it, that stands for weight. Sometimes you see a number sign. So the lower the number, the thicker the thread, just like the linen thread we talked about. So I usually use a 30 weight thread for general sewing and 50 or finer for sewing finer fabrics and finishing. And the ones I have listed are usually a 2 or 3 filament twist. But it comes down to this. Choose the thickest thread that your fabric will allow. This means that you only have to sew with one length of thread. You don't have to double it. And doubling is one of the things that makes your thread tangle. Another reason is that you haven't waxed it. So if you'd like to learn how to wax your thread, check out this video here. So now that you've chosen the weight of your thread, you can correspond your needle to that because your thread and your needle should be approximately the same thickness. And if you'd like to know more about how to choose needles for hand sewing, check out this video. And the next video is going to be about the right way to thread your needle. So make sure you subscribe and sign up for notifications so you'll get notified when that video and any of our other videos come out. Thank you for watching and happy making.